everybody, and welcome back to Ink and Paper Blog. Today, it's the Spilling Tea Book Club. I'm Russell.
And I'm Ryan, and today we're reading The Street.
The Street by Ann Petry. And I don't know about you, Ryan. I'm so glad we read it.
This book was amazing, and I'm so excited to talk with everybody about this.
Cannot wait. So you guys, if you don't remember, we are going to do every book club. We're going to start. One of us will do a little bit of a background about the author. One of us will summarize the plot. And there is so much to talk about in this book. So we will do our best to get to everything that's in our heads. So Ann Petry, she was a very interesting woman as I started to research her. So she was born in 1908 and she died in 1997. So she almost lived to be 90 years old. She was born in Connecticut and she died in Connecticut in the same little town. But in the 1930s, late 1930s, she moved to New York City when she married her husband. Something interesting I didn't know, Ryan. She went to the University of Connecticut and she got her, I think it's called a PhD. She became a pharmacist.
Oh, wow.
Yes, because her family wanted her. She wanted to be a writer, but her family wanted her to be a pharmacist. So she got a degree in pharmacology, became a pharmacist at the family business. And then when she moved to New York, she actually wound up doing a couple of really cool things. One, she went to Columbia and studied creative writing between 1944 and 1946. And The Street came out in 1946. So I feel like maybe Columbia was a big piece of the this book. And she also worked in the after-school programs in Harlem. And I was reading some interviews with her daughter who said that working in those programs and walking through the streets of Harlem and seeing for her for the first time sort of the poverty and the neglected children really stuck with her and wound up inspiring The Street.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, The Street was published in 1946, and it was the first novel by a Black woman to ever sell over 1 million copies. And she wrote a couple of other novels. The Narrows, I believe, is the one that most people consider her masterpiece, but I think The Street was the most popular book in her lifetime. Mm-hmm. And she also wrote a nonfiction book for children about the life of Harriet Tubman.
Wow.
Yeah, that was interesting. So she sounds like a woman that just had a very interesting life and wrote an amazing novel.
This novel's incredible. I'm definitely going to check out The Narrows because if that one's better, I can't wait to read it. So a little bit about The Street. This novel takes place in the 1940s in Harlem. The novel follows Mrs. Lute Johnson, who at the beginning of the novel, right away, she's moving into this apartment in Harlem on 116th Street, and she is living on her own with her son. And as the novel progresses, there are some jumps back and forth between her different periods of her life and through some of the different characters. So early on, we learned that she went to Connecticut, which we can see the Connecticut connection now because Ann Petry grew up there, and she worked for a very wealthy family. And she was a cook and a maid, and she was making good money and working really hard. And while she was there, her husband started an affair with another woman. So she moves back, takes the kid, and they move in with her father, who I believe he was making like gin in his bathtub type situation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, not the best situation to raise Bub, who's an 8-year-old when we meet him in the novel. And so she moves out of her father's apartment and moves from Jamaica, Queens to Harlem in Manhattan. And when she moves, we meet a lot of the characters around that. There's Jones, the super of the building. There is Min, his wife, or girlfriend. It's not totally clear, but they do live together and there is some kind of romantic relationship. Mrs. Hedges, who is a neighbor on the first floor, and a madam on the street who has her own girls that she sits on the window and knows everything going on in the street. We meet Boots, who is this guy that may have feelings for Ludi. We meet Junto, who owns a bar and grill and casino, who employs Boots. And then a huge character is the street. This 116th Street is just such a huge part of the book. And I don't know how many times it says the street, but we really get a sense of like the place. It even opens in the very first pages with a description of the street. There was a cold November wind blowing through 116th Street. It rattled the tops of garbage cans, sucked window shades out through the top of open windows, and set them flapping back against the windows. And it drove most of the people off the street in the block between 7th and 8th Avenues, except for a few hurried pedestrians who bent double in an effort to offer the least possible exposed surface to its violent assault. That's the opening, and that in itself is incredible. I mean, her writing is just amazing throughout this.
I totally agree. I mean, I thought one of the things I knew we had to talk about was the title, The Street. And we had to talk about the fact that the street is almost like this omnipresent character. And it's sort of a microcosm of the world that that Ludi lives in. So lots of stuff happen on the street that can sort of be taken out and looked at in a much bigger scale. And it's just so good. Her writing, I don't know what I expected, but when I started it, I was blown away. Like, she has such vivid descriptions of so many different things. And it's so beautiful, but it's also got sort of a grittiness to it.
Yeah. It does have that very raw energy that you can feel just at the beginning. Like, this isn't a cute book. It isn't quaint at all. Like, it is, like, her descriptions set up this brutality that you can feel coming just from this environment. It was really amazing.
Well, what's interesting, right? So at its heart, this is the story of a woman trying to live on her own to raise her 8-year-old son. But I don't know if you felt the same way. There is an immense amount of tension throughout this book, and that's the plot. And you're like,
right.
It's fascinating that what is that tension going to pay off as? And Ryan and I will tell you, we are not going to spoil any endings. We are not going to ruin anything, but we will tell you that it comes to an ending, people, and you're going to want to talk about it. I promise.
I don't know the exact timeline of this novel. There's some jumps back and forth, but I feel like this is only over a few days or a few weeks that the actual plot takes place.
I agree. Which
amps up the tension because it is like a powder keg. At first, the street is an opportunity for Ludi. Like, she's on her own. She's away from her husband. She's away from her father. You know, she's going to be an independent woman, raising her son, you know, taking control of her life. But soon we learned that the street is a brutal place to live, and it's so hard on the residents. And we meet a lot of the different people, and we get their point of view, which was just as interesting as Ludi's story.
Absolutely.
Whoa. I mean, this, like, we get info on Mrs. Hedges, on Min, on Jones. It's interesting to see the different ways the women cope on the street.
Yes. Well, it's, you know, it's not a long book, but Ann Petry creates these multi-dimensional people. And all of them, every character that Ryan's mentioned, everybody that we talk about is full 360. Like, you get who they are, what their motivations are, and it's so well done. It's so well done. So I want to talk about Jones, the super.
Right.
When we first meet him, we already know that Ludi knows that there's something off about this guy, right? And she
Right.
does not trust him. But I will tell you guys, chapter 4 is the chapter where we finally get Jones's perspective for the first time. And I wrote down on my little sticky, I said, this may be one of the creepiest characters and chapters I've ever read about a predator. And he's kind of the villain in a lot of ways, and she makes him so scary. He's petrifying to me.
Yeah. He was really, I think predator is a good word. He was so predatory. He looked at Ludi as an object from the moment she stepped in the door in a way that we don't normally see. And I think if this was written by a man, we wouldn't get that perspective.
I agree.
But Ann Petry knows that man and knows what he was thinking.
Absolutely.
And she's encountered him so many times.
Yes. Well, and I put a note somewhere is I was reading this book is there's a lot of this book where we have people who see Ludi as an object. You know, Junto, is that how we're going to say this word? Junto?
Yeah.
So Junto is a white man that owns the local bar. He also owns this casino that Ludi wants to sing at. By the way, I looked up what the word means, interestingly enough. So it was actually a term that originated in English politics in the 1640s, and it was actually made famous by Ben Franklin. He actually had a club in Philadelphia called Junto, interesting enough.
Oh.
But it stood for a political group or faction, which I found interesting because Junto kind of represents the white man in the novel. So he is that faction. He sees Ludi as an object. Boots sort of sees Ludi as an object. Even Mrs. Hedges continuously offers Ludi the ability to work as one of her girls as an object to make money. So that's a very recurring theme about sort of the Black woman as object.
Yeah, I would agree. Even the nice white couple in Connecticut, they treated her like, you know, she was the help. She wasn't part of the family. I mean, they were probably decent to her at that time, but she was still just an object, somebody replaceable.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much to talk about. It's so hard to know where to go next.
It's hard to talk about it without talking about the ending because, you know, you kind of need that whole picture. One thing I did like is the way she structured the novel, and she brought in the different points of view. It wasn't exactly like the entire novel was told from like 7 different angles. It was almost like some chapters she brought in and it was just a little bit of a turn, and she would look at a situation from a different angle. And that was interesting, just to bring some perspective. You know, like a lot of these, since it's over a very short time, you kind of see like, well, this is what Jones did. And this was Min's reaction to Jones, who was observing Ludi. And so you can see this kind of like fully forming, but it's not as like overt as, well, now we're telling Min's story and now we're telling Boots's story or whatever. And it was just very interesting how she formed this world in a way that I've never seen in any novel. And it was done really, really well.
Yeah.
I was so impressed by it.
Yeah. There was one of the other things, and I think it goes to her brilliance as a novelist, is she also talks about race in a lot of different ways. And she does it by giving examples or telling stories that sort of give you an idea of the presentation of race in 1944 Harlem. One that really stuck out to me is Boots, who talks about the draft and talks about how the draft was different for Black men than other people who were drafted. And there was, I don't have the page marked, but it was so brilliantly done because he wants to avoid the draft and he's willing to do anything to avoid the draft because he knows the repercussions of the draft on a Black man in America. And it just was like this discussion of race from a different angle that I hadn't ever thought of, but was so well done. It was never heavy-handed.
No. And this book was probably taking place during World War II or just at the end, since it was published in 1946. And that was one of the most scathing critiques, where Boots says, I'm not going to go over and fight for these white people who won't even be in the same like platoon as me, who will be segregated. I think there was even a section that said they went over to England and purposefully segregated like the different areas just to maintain the segregation here in the United States. I never thought of it that way, but I mean, it's atrocious.
Yeah.
And we do get that kind of, we do see a lot of privilege, like white privilege exemplified by the situations that Ludi finds herself in. You know, she might not have had to leave to go to Connecticut if she could have found work. Her husband couldn't work because the white people were taking all the jobs. And this is even during World War II, that was supposed to be a semi-prosperous time where women were called to the workforce, but yet Black people still were not given those opportunities, even in New York City. Yeah. It was really hard to read some of those passages.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the anger and the feelings that Ludi and Boots and other characters have towards white people, they're there and they're clear, but that was not Ann Petry's motivation for the novel. So Ludi is more than that. She is a mom trying to figure out how she is going to remove her son from this situation. And I don't know about you, as every page turned, I kind of thought, she's never going to be able to get out of this. And my heart was rendered for her because she was clearly working so hard for that. And I don't know that I ever believed, or Anne ever believed, that it would happen.
Right. I think that was probably the case for a lot of Black women who were single mothers trying to make it in some way. It definitely wasn't a lecture. It wasn't preaching, but it centered the Black experience in Harlem in the 40s in this very specific way. And it didn't feel much different from today, to be honest. Absolutely. It felt so modern. And a lot of the same issues were still there that I was shocked.
Yeah, I think I said to you when we were talking about before we filmed the video, if you just changed the monetary nature, like the rent was $26 and made it $2,000, this book has very, very real 2020 repercussions. And I think that that's sort of the brilliance of it and what makes it so heartbreaking. Is that it does, like, I don't know that a ton has changed, and that there are Ludis probably out there right now facing these same exact issues.
Yeah, I agree.
So, gosh, I guess it's so hard to not want to talk about the end of the book because it is quite a thing. But what I think we should probably discuss, though, maybe is how Ann Petry sets you up as a reader to be rooting for a character and then turns it on her head. She has a way of turning Ludi's life on its head with very subtle changes. And I thought one that was really interesting was when she gets invited to be a singer at the casino. I didn't see that coming at all.
Right.
But it changes Ludi's ideas. It gives her hope. And I thought that was interesting.
Yes, I agree. I think there was a lot of plot in this book that builds as we go. And so it just builds on this tension, and it builds the pressure on Ludi. And so, you know, when she gets this hope and then it gets crushed, and then she gets this other hope and then it gets crushed. And you can just see how these small plot elements just build on each other. And it was really well crafted.
Yeah. One character that I personally could have a whole book about was Mrs. Hedges. She was fascinating. So this woman who's this madam, but we learn that she's had, and I don't want to give away her backstory, but
yeah,
events have happened that have sort of made her feel like she's got only a certain place in the world, right?
Right.
But, and even before those events happen, she's a bigger woman. She's tall. She's, you know, she's very strong, and she has image issues. And I thought it was really interesting that her image issues in contrast to Ludi's issues of being the beautiful woman as object versus this other, you know, woman who didn't feel like anyone wanted her.
Yes, exactly. And maybe that was a bit more freeing for her because she was able to find a way in the world, though she did it by exploiting others in a lot of ways. Her backstory was really interesting, and I was surprised when we got there. And just kind of the different connections in the book were really interesting in how it built this very full world and made these characters fully realized.
Yeah, and it never felt forced. You know how sometimes you read a book and you see them putting all the strings together and you just see them force one of those strings? In this novel, everything seemed to fit just right.
Yeah, I agree. I think it could have easily gone off the rails. It could have become melodramatic, and it didn't. It stayed very grounded. It could have been confusing or just like a mess, and it was just so well structured and brought together, and it was really incredible.
Yeah, I am so glad we read it, and I'm so sad I hadn't read it before.
I'm sad that this isn't getting a lot of the attention that I really think it deserves.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about other people from the early 20th century, Hemingway, Faulkner. We get these big names, and I think Ann Petry can rival these. Like, this is something that should be read in school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It sort of reminded me, it's like if I were to teach a class, Ann Petry, Nella Larson's Passing, you know, books like that just tell an amazing story with such craft and such language. And yeah, I can't stop thinking about this book. I just can't.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing, and it's thrilling. Like, it's not like an intellectual read. Like, there's an intellectual part of it that I think deserves reading, but it's actually an engaging book that you want to find out what happens. I think it even might be called a thriller or a suspense novel at some point, and it really reads that way. I can see why it would sell so many copies back then, because it would be so engaging.
But it also has such a sense of truth, I think. I think Ludi seems like someone a lot of people know or have heard of, or there's probably a lot of women that can identify with her. That I think that's also the power. And I think everyone reading it is rooting for an outcome. And, you know, and I think that that's the power of creating a character that people really fall in love with. And Ludi's not perfect. She sometimes does makes decisions that I'm like, oh, I wish you would do something a little bit different. But I thought I guess we have to sort of start thinking about wrapping up, so this video isn't forever long. But we haven't talked about Bub. Bub. Bub.
The 8-year-old son of
her
Ludi.
8-year-old son, who I thought was really interesting because he was, to me at least, and I don't know if you felt the same way, he seemed a lot wiser to the world than an 8-year-old. But
yeah,
one of the things that made me remember he was a child was when his mom would go out at night because he was afraid of the dark.
mm-hmm.
And I thought that was brilliant. Ann Petry made this boy recognize how poor his mom was, what he had to do or figure out some way to help that. But at the same time, he couldn't sleep with the light out. I thought that that was a brilliant sort of parts of this young boy.
Yeah, and I mean, he was running through the streets of Harlem by himself at 8, which I don't know if that seems scary to me now to think of that, but in some ways he had to grow up super fast, and then we got those reminders that he's still a little kid. And that was so heartbreaking to see his position and his observations of what happened.
Yeah. Well, and Jones, in his obsession with Ludi, tries to utilize the boy as sort of a pawn in that too.
Mm-hmm.
And there were moments where you sort of felt like Bub got it. Like he knew what the background noise was a little bit. And he was just like, I don't think that this is what I want to do. And I thought I thought that was just a real testament to how fast some kids have to grow up.
Mm-hmm.
In the world. So yeah, it's a truly amazing book.
I agree. I did want to mention that it was interesting we read this right after Listening Valley.
Yeah.
Which occurred at the same time. It was during World War II. That one took place in England and on the border of Scotland, and this one took place in New York City. But they couldn't be more different. And the themes were very similar. It was about women, female independence, women making it on their own. Even there was like the similarities of an aspiring music career. But if you read these two together, you can see how much white privilege plays into these lives.
Yeah.
How much better you are if you own property. Just the ability to find a job and make it on your own. It was a really great to compare these back to back, I thought.
Absolutely. And I think that you said it really well with this. It's this idea of what would a white person in England during World War II want to read, and what would a Black woman in Harlem at the end of World War II write about, and the vast difference. In a lot of ways, it is the same story about a woman coming into her own to try to change the lives of herself, but one is handed stuff, one is scraping by, and it's just, it was fascinating to me to sort of really put the two together. That could be a whole conversation for another video. It really could.
It really could.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Ryan, if I had to say, this is like a 6 teacup book for me.
If we could go that high, I think like we need to expand the scale.
Yes.
This is one of those books that I hope this helps get more people to read it, because it should be a classic that everybody reads. It should be on everyone's bookshelf. The writing's good. It's accessible. It's not frilly or like really difficult to read. It's very straightforward, but it's just so good and so descriptive and so well developed. It needs to be everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I have a feeling it will 100% be in my best books I read this year at the end of the year. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I think, a huge thank you has to go to Tiare Jones, the writer of American Marriage, because in I think 2018, she really started to push for Ann Petry to get a renaissance. And she's the reason it was reissued in this version that I have. And she wrote the introduction. And I think, we have to say thank you for her to get, it takes people championing these books. And if it wasn't for her, I'm not sure that the new edition would ever have come out. So, thank you to Tiari Jones.
Yeah. I hope more recommendations like this come out as we start seeing that maybe we don't always read as widely and diversely as we should. And as we promote and we publicize more writers and give more writers of color more opportunities, then these past books will come out and we'll realize that this was there all along and we could have read it and it was a powerful story, but it just didn't get the champion that it deserved. Not because the writing was bad or the story was bad. It just needed a boost. And I'm glad to see that that's happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you are so interested and want to be part of our Zoom call, it is next Saturday, August 8th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Go ahead and email either Ryan or I. Both of our emails are down in the below. You can definitely join. And it has been, we've done 2 of them and they have been excellent. And we really, really love it. And yeah, I think it's time to announce book number 4, Ryan.
So book number 4 is going to be The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. I believe she's a Chilean author. This was first published, I think, in Spanish in the 1970s, and this version came out in English in the 1980s.
Yeah. I'm really excited. I have not read a ton of Isabel Allende, so I'm excited to dive into this work, and I've heard nothing but rave reviews of it.
This is the back of it, and I just love that it has like the full author headshot, which we don't get anymore, but we really should.
We absolutely should. We should.
I mean, she's gorgeous. That probably helps. But I vote we do this for every author from now on.
I am on board. So, okay, Ryan, how many teacups?
I would give it 5 teacups.
I need to get myself a cute teacup like that. And I, of course, would give it 5 teacups as well. It was phenomenal. So,
yeah. Everybody should read this. Come talk to us about it on the Zoom session or in the comments. It'd be great to hear people who've already read it. I know a number of people have because it was promoted in 2018. So that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we thank you guys for joining us. We are loving doing the Spilling Tea Book Club. I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as we are. And we will talk to you guys again in a month in our new books. So talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.